So welcome to the Global Network webinars. My name is Alexander Loschke, and I will be moderating this webinar today together with my colleague Panya Yu. Today we are extremely happy to have with us Alex Selby-Boothroyd, who will present how data storytelling and visualizations are done at The Economist. The Economist has been using data to inform its reporting for over 180 years. In 2015, the Data Journalism Department, a dedicated team of journalists, visualizers, and interactive developers, was created to push the boundaries of data storytelling. From election forecasts and pandemic modeling to wildfire prediction software using satellite data, the team has embraced the idea that in a world where everything is data, where everything is a potential story. During the webinar, we'll look at how the team of The Economist finds the data and how they create eye-catching charts in multiple formats to help tell the stories that the data reveal. So before I now hand over to Alex, just some practical remarks. During the webinar, you will have the opportunity to put your comments and questions into the meeting chat at any time. And we will come back to those questions then during the Q&A session. During the Q&A, we will enable your microphones and cameras so you can ask the questions yourself just to create a more interactive atmosphere. So please, during the Q&A, just raise your hand and you can ask then your question. As always, this Global Network webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Global Network of Data Officers and Statisticians at yammer.com/unstats. So if you haven't joined the network yet, we invite you to follow the link in the chat. I will put it there in a moment, and to sign up. And now I want to hand over to you, Alex. The floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to talk to you all. I'm going to, as Alex said, talk a bit about how we do storytelling of data at The Economist. We'll go back a bit to the beginning of time, according to The Economist. This is our very first issue in 1843. I've been looking in our archives trying to find when we sort of got into data visualization, and it's a lot later than I thought. The early issues had lots of data in them, lots of tables. Half of the print issue was just tables of data. The first visualizations I could find were on our letters page. These are coins that someone's drawn around, and that's a family tree of cholera victims. But these aren't data visualizations created by The Economist. My strong suspicion is the editors of The Economist in the 19th century were a bit mistrustful of data visualization. I know when William Playfair innovated many sort of techniques of data visualization, the bar chart, the line chart, pie chart, etc., people were mistrustful. They thought there was no substitute for hard numbers, and that making pictures out of numbers could be duplicitous or deliberately misleading. It took The Economist editors until the 1920s, really, that's the first chart I could find, this line chart here, to embrace the sort of benefits of data visualization over simple tables. They soon fell into a very convenient pattern, we'll see why in a minute, of these small sort of square charts usually that tell you one thing very, very clearly. And that's been the case since the sort of 70s, so it's 50 years now. We changed the background color, but the principle remains the same. It's a small visualization that is supposed to tell you one thing clearly and back up a point in a story. During the sort of beginning of this century, there was a movement towards more sort of immersive, what we call data journalism. The New York Times was a big proponent of it. And the editor of Economist in sort of 2010s was keen on the Economist doing that kind of data journalism. So he commissioned a team to be set up. This is the data journalism team. It was started in 2015. I joined as soon as it started as one of the 2 interactive visual data journalists. And it was quite a small team, definitely compared to now. So we're up to about 22, which is pretty big, but there are very sort of divided roles. The data journalists find data, analyze it, and write data-driven stories. The visual data journalists create all the charts and maps, and the interactive visual data journalists create, it used to be moving charts, now it's kind of any kind of visual storytelling. And we took on one political data scientist last year to help us with what I think we called Votorama, 76 elections, I think, around the world. We only modelled a couple of them, the US and the UK, but we had poll trackers for many others. And they are a big draw to our readers. They really want to know what's going on in the political situation in any country at any given time. So I'll tell you a bit about how and where we find data for our stories. This is, I think, the sort of the perfect example of what data journalism is. A few years ago, there was a story on the radio one morning that a popular forum for parents called Mumsnet was losing advertisers because companies didn't want to be associated with what they thought was an increasingly sweary forum. I don't think they knew that was the case. I think they just felt that there were too many swear words on there and they didn't want to be involved. So one of our data journalists heard the story on the radio, came into work and immediately wrote a script to scrape about 10,000 articles on the forum and then simply counted the swear words over time. You can see from the sort of left-hand side of the chart, I've blurred it because these are really rude words. They're increasing a lot over sort of a decade, and milder swear words, which I've left in, I hope that's okay, they're sort of going down. So this was a kind of an empirical way of proving that the advertisers were right. There was more and more swearing on Mumsnet. We were a bit worried that the owners of Mumsnet might be a little upset with us for proving this, and it sort of might lead to more advertisers pulling out. It's quite the opposite. The owner of Mumsnet, Justine Roberts, she loved this swearometer. It's so much so that she added one to the site permanently. You can imagine during COVID, it went off the charts as parents were trying to struggle with homeworking and home teaching. And it's a really good way of sort of testing the temperature of the users of the forum. I think during a mortgage crisis, swear words went right up, as you can imagine. So it's a nice example of where something we did led to a small change in policy somewhere else. This is a really good source of data. Google Trends. It's another way of sort of testing the pulse of the world, really, and seeing what people are looking for. One of our data journalists was a little despondent at not being able to afford a house. She found that as she moved from flat share to flat share, she was taking her plants with her and noticed that other people of her age were doing the same. And she wondered if there was a sort of trend towards people owning houseplants, people who couldn't actually afford a house. So she used Google Trends to show pretty clearly that interest in all of these houseplants had really gone up over sort of the years up to 2018. It was a simple idea, a really clear visualization, and just really nicely done and pretty easy because you can just get this data from Google Trends very easily. I often look when something big is happening in the world at Google Trends and to see what people are searching for and to sort of guess at what they might be searching for. So last year there was a big eclipse crossing part of America. I thought maybe people would be searching for this song, and you can kind of see the path of the eclipse and people searching for quite a good tune, Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler. This one's a bit more disturbing. A lot of people clearly looked a bit too closely at the eclipse, and you can kind of see this path of people searching for why their eyes hurt after the eclipse. So that's kind of fun, but you can get interesting stories out of Google Trends. This is a really interesting exercise one of our data journalists did. at the very beginning of a pandemic. He was on his way into work and he noticed the streets were a bit quieter. This was in sort of late Feb, early March 2020. And he wondered if he could measure how busy streets were. So he wrote a script that would scrape this little bar chart in the bottom left-hand corner of Google Maps for prominent places around in cities around the world every 15 minutes. He let it run for a week, and he wrote this excellent story called Ghost Towns. I'll zoom in on the chart here just to sort of give you a flavour of what it's showing. He showed that over the course of just over a week, Rome was emptying out. We know that Italy was one of the first European countries hit by the pandemic. We know that Australia wasn't really affected at the beginning, so Sydney was busier than ever. And he was able to show this by getting the data, and this is basically mobile phones that are pinging in those locations. Again, we were worried that maybe Google might be annoyed at us for scraping this data. There's sort of fuzzy ground around scraping data. It turns out they saw the huge benefit in this, what they call mobility data, and they started making that available, and that started appearing definitely on the TV in the UK. The Prime Minister was sort of showing mobility during his daily briefings, and I think it was a very useful thing for people who were very worried about catching COVID or immunosuppressed. They could make decisions about whether to go somewhere based on this mobility data. They knew how busy it was based on this data. And I think this is a great example of a data journalism story that has led to a really beneficial sort of change in policy. Google kept this data going for three years or so. And it was an interesting story that led to a very interesting data set. We get a lot of our data from the sky nowadays. There are satellites, obviously, that take pictures of the ground, and we've used those for sort of tracking troop movements. There's other satellites that bounce microwaves off the ground, and one of our data journalists wanted to see if she could assess the damage in Mariupol during the early stages of the Russia-Ukraine war. She downloaded all of the microwave data and was able to assess which buildings had been damaged by how distorted the microwaves were coming back up to the satellite, and put together this map and a story based around it. About a week later, UN peacekeepers went in and assessed all the damage, and it corroborated pretty much what we had discovered. So this was like an innovative use of satellite data for an interesting and important story. We create our own models. We do them a lot for elections. This was an interesting assertion Donald Trump made in 2019. He said that Google News was biased and would give you left-leaning newspaper results rather than an even spread or right-leaning. We wanted to test that. So this is a really good example of how you need to be careful in how you capture the data. One of our data journalists set up a computer to search for specific keywords and then just grab the first 10 results from Google News for each of them. If he'd done that from his own computer, it would have been clouded by all of the searches he'd done before. It would have been UK-centric. So he had the really good idea of setting up a proxy machine in the middle of Kansas, which was a swing state. If he'd picked a very red state or a very blue state, the results may have been distorted by that. And he left this running for months, and he was able to build a model that would predict what kinds of news sites would return results for different words. And he was able to prove categorically that Google returns good news sites, fair and even-handed. It doesn't matter if they're left or right-leaning. It may have been what President Trump was getting at, but it was a very good case of building a model and getting the data to prove something one way or the other. And then the point I'd sort of make to everyone here at The Economist and everyone in my team is that everything is data, everything you see. This is a nice thing that happens twice a year in Manhattan. The sun sets at a certain point, and you can see down the streets all down the island. It's a very nice visual effect. one of our data journalists wanted to see where was the best place to stand and take a picture of this. So he scraped all the Manhattan Henge tagged images off Instagram. He got the latitude and longitudes, and he plotted them on a map, and wrote the story. It's just a nice. I really like the map. It was my only input was saying we should do it dark and show the lighter areas. I think it looks cool, but it's just an interesting example of how lat long is data, color is data, pictures are data, everything is data. This is an example of a data story that I helped with. One of our finance journalists thought, and he'd spoken to some people in the industry, that because of streaming, song structure might be changing. His assumption was that you would put the chorus earlier in the song to make people stick around long enough to get paid. If you don't, if you bounce off a song in the first few seconds, the artist doesn't get paid at all. So as a songwriter, the impetus is to get the good stuff earlier, to make sure people stick around long enough. He came to me and said, "Oh, can you prove this?" I said, "No, there's no database of chorus positions in songs." So I sort of did a calculation to work out what it would take to get this data, to put it together. And I quickly found it would take 96 days and nights to listen to top 40 for 20 years. So I started to sort of think of compromises. I thought maybe just #1 singles would be a good representation of songs over 2 decades. That would still take 17 hours to listen to all of them, all the way through. But if his assertion was correct, that the chorus was generally going to be in the first 30 seconds or so, or minute, that would only take about 5 hours. So he and I split them up. We listened to a bunch of songs each. We noted down the time the chorus appeared, and we got this chart. And I think it's a really good example of, thank God, that it worked. It does prove its point, I think. I heard some interesting music I would have heard anyway, and my Spotify mentions are kind of ruined now, but it was an interesting exercise, and a good case of, if the data don't exist, you have to go and find them. Data gathering is a big part of the data journalist's job, and thinking of ways to do it and working out how to compromise to do it is really important. This is another example of, once you've got the data, experimenting with how you visualize it. So one of our data journalists had been trying to get hold of this data for a while on the number of vasectomies taking place in America. She thought that after the Roe Wade overrule, that there may be more men getting vasectomies than beforehand. So she got the data, and this was the first chart we made, and it does show that 6 months after, there was a few more. But that could have been the case in previous years. So we looked at the each year total, and again we sort of show quite a big uptick in 2022 when it happened, but it wasn't quite there yet. This chart again doesn't really show an uptick just after the ruling. It does show a couple of interesting spikes in the data, which we'll see why in a sec. So we carried on trying to plot it. This is 6 years worth. Is kind of ruined a bit, the one on the left, by the huge drop in April 2020, which is completely understandable. We made a decision just to exclude 2020. We weren't trying to hide the fact we were excluding it, but we thought it wasn't what the story was about. So we were left with the lines on the right, and then this was the final chart that we published. It does show a big uptick in vasectomies in America in 2022 after the Dalton ruling, and that was the point of the story. But it also shows two other things. There's quite a big spike at the end of every year. And Ainsley, the data journalist, she spoke to some urologists, and they say that in America, with the way health insurance work, you have deductibles, and if you haven't used them by the end of a year, then it's basically free. So a lot of people were waiting till the end of a year to get it done. And then there was another sort of interesting jump in March, and she asked a urologist why, and he said it's because some men want to use their recovery time from a vasectomy to watch basketball, March Madness as it's called, which sounds improbable, but it's true. It's even a thing. They have adverts around this, and this is why we iterate and why we iterate on our visualizations. Is we would have missed that interesting detail if we had just shown the before and after change. Here's another a good case of why we visualize. There's a lot of dots on this chart. We could have just had a stat in our story saying that Elon Musk tweets a lot, but I think once you see how just how frequently he has been tweeting since he bought Twitter, it's kind of scary in a way. There's not that much time where he's asleep or not tweeting. It's just a real sort of instant impact chart that we ran in the piece. I think Elon Musk liked it. He retweeted it several times. That wasn't our intention, but it's a very effective visualization. This is one of my favorite charts. It's for a country. It shows polling station returns for over the course of 20 years or so. And this particular country doesn't have free and fair elections. We suspected that returning officers might just make up the numbers. And it's a kind of interesting quirk of human nature that we're not very good at making up numbers randomly. They'll generally end in a 5 or a 0. You'll say 75 or 80 or whatever. And by plotting all the data, the round numbers started to overlay each other in the sort of top right-hand corner and almost sort of form a grid pattern. That wasn't us sort of manipulating the dots. That's just how they were reported. So a really clear example of visualizing to tell a story and to show the story right there in the chart. Just a couple of other examples of charts which really stand out. There's something about them that is intrinsically interesting. This is marathon times. I'd kind of thought this myself. It was interesting to see it. People really want to run a sub 4-hour marathon. So you get this huge spike in people finishing just at 3:59 and then a big drop off at 4 and 4:01. And it's kind of human nature to want to hit a round number or to sort of beat a certain arbitrary deadline. But it's interesting to see it sort of laid out so clearly as this. And this is one I found on Reddit. It's just an interesting observation. Men want to be 6 foot, they don't want to be 5'11". This is like a very unusual drop in people self-reporting at 5'11". So you obviously take it with a pinch of salt, but it's just another example of a chart which tells a story. You don't even need that much text to back it up. So I'll just talk a bit about our approach to data visualization, the ethos we have. We have these small squares, as I mentioned. They tell you one thing clearly. We have a set of style guidelines that help us make them. So if we had to decide what color to make every line in every chart, it would send us mad. We just have a default color, red. That's the first color. We don't have to think about it or worry about it. If we've got 2 series, we have light red for the second one. This isn't always the case, but it just means 90% of the time we're not having to think of a good reason to use a certain color. If we have 3 or 4, we go to blue and blue, and they contrast well. They work together. They don't they don't clash. They're the default. Our charting tool comes up with these colors automatically for us, and it's great. It just means we don't have to worry too much. If there's 5, or especially if there's an other category, we use a gray just to sort of downplay it a bit. Any more than 5 colors, and it's probably a bit too much. Here's a good example of lots of series on the chart, but by using gray and sort of knocking back the less interesting ones, you can show the full trend. But this was a Britain piece, so we're focused on Britain, which is why it's bold, and we want to compare with another sort of similar country. So we have the US in sort of a light red. This is a good way of showing lots of data without overwhelming the readers. This is probably the most lines we'd ever really want on a chart, but again, it was a Britain story. You can really see the red Britain line sort of plummeting. It works in the story. It's a G7, so it would have been weird to have only 5 countries on there, for example. And the big exception is for political parties. It would undo so much sort of established color perception in America if we just use different colours or switch the colours for the main political parties. We try to match them in countries where we can. We know it helps readers in those countries. UK, very obvious, and then it's the other way around to sort of left and right in the US, but these are the established colours, so we use those wherever we possibly can. It helps. And then this is an example of part of my role with charts. I look at all the charts several times over the course of the week, and I sort of take a layman's approach to them. I ask myself, do I understand this? This chart, I didn't. I don't know what an associate degree is. So I asked the author, and they said it's a 2-year degree. So much better to put 2-year degree and have everyone understand that than to stick with associate degree, and only American people might understand that. And here's an example where I didn't do my job properly. The science editor really wanted to use the phrase ophidian dietary specialisms. I tried to talk about it, but I lost. It still worked. You can understand it. It talks about snake species in each category, but snake diets would have been probably a slightly easier subhead for most people to understand. But there's a kind of aspect of people reading The Economist are generally pretty smart, and they can work most things out. I try not to make them work too hard. In this case, they did, but generally hand all the information to people on a plate as simply as possible, and you're helping them. And finally, I'm just going to talk a bit about how we approach sort of data storytelling. Those examples we just saw were small blue or brown charts that sit in an article and make one point, back up something in a paragraph or something. They're not the point of the story. We have what we used to call daily charts. We call graphic detail now. This is sort of classic data journalism, where the chart is the story and the text is kind of just backing that up. So this is the landing page for graphic detail on our website. There's a promo image, we call it there. It's quite stripped down. It's got a couple of labels on it, not too much, but you can see the shape of the chart. And the headline is shipping costs are plunging. You can see the line plunging. The headline and the chart back each other up. This is the story itself. It's not that long a story, but you can see the chart is bigger there. It's got more cities on it. It's got more ticks on the x-axis. It starts at 2019 rather than 2020. There's a bit more space for us to do that. Back to the promo image, we started at 2020 because it would have just been awkward having 2019, just a little sliver of it. It wasn't really that essential to the message of the story. And then we make a mobile version as well. This one, you can see it's a little different. It doesn't have all the tick marks. We've moved the labels around to sort of make sure they're legible. It's a big part of our job to make sure everything we do works on every platform. So 10 years ago when I started, probably 80% of our subscribers read us in print. Nowadays, it's probably 70% read us on a mobile phone, and it's just a very different piece of technology. As I mentioned earlier, it's lucky, really lucky, that we make small charts mostly, and most small charts work on mobile phone perfectly, and so we don't have to do anything different to them. It's only these sort of larger charts that we also make a smaller version. This is another example where the headline and the map are doing the same job. You can see the protests erupting across Russia. It's very, very clear what this story is going to be about and what the data are showing you. And finally, this is another example of sort of iterating on the visualization and teasing out extra information. So this is a story about why graduates live longer than non-graduates in America. And you can see the top line is graduates, the bottom red line is undergraduates. There's also a huge sort of drop-off in sort of 2019 onwards, which you wouldn't have really got if it was just a comparison sort of average over time. So I don't know that we included it much in this story, but that's a whole new story that just is spawned by visualizing the data in a certain way. So that's everything I've got. To conclude, I mean, the main, I think if there's one word to take away, it'd be compromise. There's no perfect data set. I mentioned the preposterous idea that there might be a database of chorus entry points in hit songs. There is one. I met a guy that has been compiling one since 1958, and he shared it with me, and I wish I'd had that when I was making that other chart. It's it's kind of almost random that he has done this, but he's also written a book based on all of his findings of changes in popular music. There's fewer sax solos nowadays, fewer key changes, etc. And he could prove all of this because he collected that data himself. But generally, compromising is the best way forward in data and data journalism. You very often have to collect the data yourself. There's two types of charts. I think we make the small chart that makes 1 point, or the chart that is the whole point. They both have their places. They're both popular. I think that you're going to get more of a reaction to the small chart that makes 1 point. A line that goes up unexpectedly is always interesting to people. If it's a bigger chart and it takes a bit more to digest, it's well worth people spending time with in a print publication, but they're probably less likely to stop and sort of engage with it on social media, which is where we get a lot of our traffic. And that's why we make two versions of these more complex charts. So that's just be prepared to reformat your charts. And then keep it simple is the best possible advice. The Economist is known for its concision. It doesn't waste your time, and we want to do the same with our charts. We want to show you something very clearly and very quickly. That's it. Oh, we have a course if you're interested. It isn't exactly what I've just showed you, but it's very useful for spending a couple of weeks immersing yourself in how we and the data team do data storytelling visualization. Thank you. Alex, shall I stop sharing now?
Yes, thank you so much, Alex, for the presentation so far. In the meantime, I was trying to actually allow the microphones for the participants. I will try again in a second, but I saw that I cannot unmute myself while doing that, so it's a little bit of a, yeah. Anyway, so I would like to open up the floor for questions. So if you have a question, maybe please raise your hand and you can ask the question yourself. We have already quite a good number of questions also in the meeting chat, and maybe let me kick off while I try to actually turn on the mics again. A question about web scraping of data. So there were a couple of questions there. You also mentioned during your talk that there are that you were scraping data from Google, for instance, and that you were fearing that maybe Google wasn't too happy about that. So if you could give us some tips or some guidelines about web scraping data and what is kind of okay and what you would consider not okay when you scrape data. Maybe you can say a few words about that first.
Sure. Yeah, it's a really good question. The kind of the legality of it is quite hazy, honestly. Generally, if I went to a website and clicked and dragged some numbers off it and then put them in a chart, I think that is fair use. You copied the data yourself. If I write a program that does that, it's still sort of in this kind of fair use sort of grey area. If I sort of hack into the website and download their database, that's obviously not illegal. Then not legal. That would be not fair use. I think it depends on a case-by-case basis. What we would never sort of go to another newspaper website and download all the data that they had spent a long time sort of compiling. But most of our data comes from the World Bank, UN, statistical offices, where the whole point of their sort of their website is for you to go and sort of get the data. It's only things like the Google Maps one was a bit of an isolated case where that data just didn't exist in any sort of database format, but it existed on every map, just in the back end. I think Google may have, I don't think they would have sort of tried to pursue us in any way, because anyone could get that data. It's not like you needed special tools or any special abilities, really. It's just having the idea, knowing the data's there, and then working out an easy way to get hold of it. And I think the fact that they made that data available for free, for every sort of place in the world, is a sort of indication that there's a public utility to it. And it was just our story that alerted them to that. This is all my way of saying I'm not, 100% sure of the all of the legal aspects of it. It's just there's a fair use policy that we kind of have within the data team, where if one of us is worried about something, we'll talk about it as a team, and often I'll say, no, we shouldn't do that. Sometimes we'll email them and say, do you actually have this data in a downloadable format? But if information is presented on a public-facing website, it's generally it's usable, because you can see it, you can copy and paste it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, for this. Yeah, I see now the first hand up by Amr Noor. He is a director here at the UN Statistics Division. Amr, please come in.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to the other Alex as well for this facility. Alex, my question, I think somebody just put actually a question about the AI, and I think my question was relating to the AI. Have you used or tested AI in this endeavor of the storytelling, whether in terms of the data collection, visualization, and has it corroborated? I mean, what would you have done without the AI? All right, so I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. The Economist in general is really AI curious and experimenting a lot with different ways it can be used to, I'm trying to think of the right word here. I guess enhance our journalism is one way of phrasing it, but really to assist our journalists in what they're doing. What it can't do is create a really good chart from a data set on its own and write an interesting story. It can create a chart, it can write a story, but things like the March Madness sort of little detail in the vasectomy data, it would never know to ask why there was a spike in March every year. So it may have made the chart, but you would be lacking that kind of the human interest, the anecdote, the thing that makes so many Economist stories a pleasure to read, is the little extra facts. If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd say it just can't make charts at all. I experimented just a couple of months ago with a data set, really simple data set of IMDb ratings for Oscar nominated movies. I gave the data to AI and said, make me a chart. Maybe 20 charts, and the very first chart it made was the one that I had made myself, and that really showed what I wanted it to show. So it's much better than it was a year ago. The danger, and I was talking to a data visualization teacher yesterday about this. He runs courses. He asks his students to make charts with AI at the very beginning, and they all do, and they all love what they've made. And by the end of the course, they can't believe how bad the charts are and how much they're sort of distorting the data or missing the point of the data. So the real risk is that you rely on AI to do everything, and to come up with the one point that is hidden in your data. And so often there's many points, and there's many ways of sort of displaying them. I'm a bit of a proponent of AI. I use it mainly for small tasks that would just take me a bit of time to do. I've been using Excel for 30 years, and yet I don't know how many brackets to put at the end of a really long formula. ChatGPT will just do that for me. So getting it to handle these small, sort of tedious tasks, so I can concentrate on the bigger, more interesting sort of human interest tasks, is a good way of dividing your time with AI, I think.
Thanks. Yeah, again, I want to say to everyone, if you want to ask a question live, please just raise your hand and we will come to you. But there was a question in the chat actually, which I think is very, very interesting. And it is about the visualization software that you use. If you could tell us a little bit more about that. Is that something that you buy or that you have custom made yourself? Maybe you can say a few things about this.
Sure. So we built our own charting tool. It's called Silver Bullet, which was a ironic name I came up with. The idea being that it would kill everything or do everything, and of course it doesn't. But what it does is it makes our simple, small, sort of square line charts, bar charts, scatter charts really quickly and easily, and then we take them into Illustrator and do the sort of finessing. So in some of those examples, one country was in bold. We do that manually, and we choose where the label goes because we can sort of work out the best place for it. But it does everything else. You paste some data in a Google sheet, you press a button, and it makes an Economist chart. We've been using that for years, and it just does probably 80% of the charts that we create every week. For the rest, we use R. Have you heard of R? It's such a stupid name. It's just the letter R. It's a open source statistical package or sort of thing. You can upload any kind of data into it. You write some code, and it will generate any kind of chart. It can generate 100 charts in just one line of code, and they're all ugly as sin. They look terrible, but they are a really quick way for our visualizers and our data journalists to see what the final chart's going to be. And very often we'll get it into sort of as good shape as we can in our export it and then make it look nice in Illustrator. But R is brilliant at making small multiples, as we call them. So 100 charts or 50 charts, one for each state in America. It will even put them in the sort of the rough sort of locations of the states. Makes scatter charts, draws trend lines, does very complex statistical things, and makes pretty much any type of chart with just a bit of code. And the nice thing is you don't even need to know how to write that code. ChatGPT is actually really good at this. We all know AI hallucinates because it's basically just a sort of autocomplete. But it's seen so much code that it can actually generate code really well. You do need to know what the code is doing, though. I would never trust code generated without sort of looking through it line by line, but it's much easier to get it to generate a 20-line script that makes a chart, look at the code, tweak it a bit, and run it and get the chart, than it is to work out how to write those 20 lines of code. But Silver Bullet for most of our charts, and then R for most of the rest. We use QGIS for maps, and we've been toying around with Data Wrapper and Flourish, which are both really, really good sort of chart making browser-based tools.
Yeah, thanks. No, actually, for programming, yes, we in UNSD would use a lot of Python, but some people also use R. Yeah, and we use also ChatGPT and other generative AI tools actually to help us with the programming or the debugging. So this is very interesting to see that you actually also do similar things there. I see that Christophe Bontemps has his hand up. He works for the UN Regional Commission for Asia and the Pacific. So Christophe, please come in.
Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, I'm in Japan, and I really appreciated your work. I have a question. We saw a lot in what you presented, and also as a reader of The Economist, 3 or 4 types of charts: bar charts, pie charts, line charts, scatter plot, and maybe maps to be the 5th one. Do you ever break your last rule, keep it simple to make something more complex? I'm an R user as well, and I'm teaching that as well. So I know that we can do quite complex graphics when the situation or you need a little bit of more digging a little bit more deeper or show something a little bit more complex to the reader. So do you ever break this rule of keep it simple to go for something more complex? That would be my question.
Yeah, we one thing I was always keen on when I sort of took over the team, because I started as an interactive visual data journalist, is this idea that you can sort of take people through a chart. You can explain it as you go. So we do what is generally called scrolly telling. So you're in a piece, you get to a chart, it looks simple, and then some text comes up, explains something, and then something else happens and something else. We do that a bit. We don't do it all the time. It doesn't really warrant it all the time, but it is a good way of sort of holding the reader's hand through what might turn into quite a complex visualization. We also do it for fairly simple visualizations. We did a piece, one of our data journalists scraped 7 million data points of accident data in America, and he wanted to see the weight of the vehicles involved. And we had a very simple scrolly telling chart that showed you the line going up for heaviness of car, and then a line going down for fatalities in the other vehicle. And by sort of taking the reader through that one bit at a time, it is very sort of impactful. It was a simple chart in the end, but it was a way of sort of telling you what was going on. We don't do that many extremely complex charts. I say that we did a chart of everything in the known universe in our Christmas issue, which shows everything from sort of atoms to quarks and black holes and stuff. It wasn't. It's a kind of quite a well-known chart in the science world. It's incredibly impenetrable, but we use scrolly telling to take you into different bits of the chart a bit at a time, and then we show you the whole thing at the end. It's quite mind-stretching, as our editor likes to say, about our content. But we wouldn't, I think, just put that chart in front of someone and hope they're going to sort of get it straight away. For the more complex things, we'll put annotations. We'll really try and ease people into more difficult visualizations. But generally, we don't have enough space in print, and our readers don't have enough time generally to sort of engage in the more sort of complex data visualizations.
Thanks. And I would have also a follow-up question there, actually. So you were saying that there's a trend more and more from the actual print edition of The Economist to more the mobile or online uses of The Economist. Has this changed a lot how you do your data storytelling and data journalism, or would you say no, in general the principles stayed the same?
It's kind of given us the ability to create a sort of a new type of story. They're mostly data stories, but we call them visual storytelling. This is where an article might start with a video, and then as you scroll further down, you might get a map. We did a really nice piece about the Pacific Coast Highway in California, which I think is eroding, and we had a map down half of the screen and the text down the other half. And as you read, you could kind of see the places we were talking about. We could zoom in on them. We could sort of immerse the reader a bit more in the sort of location of the story. So these visual stories are something that obviously we can't do in print. What we've been doing a lot more of, and this is probably interesting from a sort of the background of journalism point of view, is we commission and create these stories completely outside of the print cycle. We publish them when we feel they're sort of best or ready, and then sometimes they will then go into print in a sort of condensed format. And this is very much the opposite of 10 years ago, where everything started in print, and then sometimes we would add features on when it went online. But we're very much more a digital first newspaper now, which sounds like a contradiction, but really what's the best way of telling the story, and bearing in mind most consumers of the story will be on a mobile phone. How do we make it work on a mobile phone? And it's hard, but it's well worth doing. And it doesn't mean that everything is small. We still do big things on desktop, but there's always a mobile version of every chart, some of which are only mobile, but the bigger ones also have a big version online too.
Yeah, thank you. Let me now lead over or give the floor to Ann Keppel. Ann Keppel works for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. And please come in.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. I can't miss the opportunity to talk to a journalist about this stuff. I'm on the team that in the statistics division that produces the estimates of how many people are hungry and food insecure in the world. And just food security and nutrition statistics in general. And kind of picking up sort of on the other side of what Christoph was saying, so much of the data has a lot behind it, and the data that FAO has on FAOStat is often misunderstood and misused, because people don't quite understand what it really is. And so I was just wondering if, in doing your stories, to what degree, you're sure you're going into the background behind the numbers and understanding them clearly, I don't know, I could think one example is the food balance sheet data is often, it's about food availability for human consumption. That's often misused and misunderstood when people are reporting on it and using the data. Another good example is the indicator of hunger in the world is actually called the prevalence of undernourishment. It's a really bad name that was given it to it decades ago. And so, there's a communication issue there in talking about it. The indicator is called prevalence of undernourishment, where we're talking about hunger. Access to calories is really what it's about. So anyway, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the challenges you face in like going to a database like FAOStat and using the data in the proper way. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question. We kind of benefit from low turnover. I've been at Economist like nearly 30 years. I've been to several 50-year anniversary parties. Generally, people in the research team and everywhere else have been here such a long time. They made that mistake once, and then they learn the correct usage of that data, and then they don't do it again.
What the hell?
The other, the sort of the main thing that all of our journalists do is that they talk to people. So if they see a number that's kind of really surprising, they'll very rarely just take it at face value. They'll want to speak to someone and ask them, what does this actually mean? Why this looks like people are getting, fuller, like rather than, hungrier. How come it's, called this? And that sort of catches quite a lot of these potential sort of problems with misunderstanding the data. So most of our stories which have charts in them, there's a journalist involved who's gone to the country and spoken to people. We reported on Sudan a lot and food insecurity there. There's someone there who's talking to people and sort of seeing the situation, and that's a good way of sort of saying this actually doesn't tally up with what I thought the data was showing me. I'm going to speak to an expert who can explain it a lot better. So it's a bit of sort of experience and a bit of sort of constantly checking your assumptions and checking what things actually mean.
Thank you for this explanation as well. I have here another colleague with his hand up. So it's Andy Amir Pradivi, who works for UN Migration, so for the International Organization for Migration. Please come in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. Can you hear me well?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes, so my name is Andy. I am a data communications officer from the IOM, communicating mostly actually data visualization for social media about migration, displacement, and migrant deaths and disappearances. But actually, my question is more to the impact of the format that your share. Have you found like a certain format that is more impactful than the others? For example, we know now there is more often being used scrollytelling, like in our interactive charts or video. Which one is more impactful, and why is it more impactful than the others? Will be great to hear your experience. Thank you.
Yeah, so we repurpose charts for social media. It's very rare that we'll ever sort of post a chart exactly as it appeared in print. We generally put a headline or a key takeaway at the top of the chart. These are all static images, but these go on Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook. And we make them once and they go onto all those formats, and the headline tells you what the chart is saying, but you can get more information from the chart, if you sort of spend a little bit of time with it. That, I think, is the most effective way of stopping people from just scrolling past. If it's an interesting chart and an interesting takeaway, you're much more likely to engage with it. I love scrollytelling, but you kind of have to package that up into a animated GIF or something, and then hope that someone sticks around long enough to watch the whole thing. And if they come in halfway through, they have to sort of wait to go back to the beginning. This is for social media, which doesn't sort of allow any kind of interactivity. So it seems a shame, but sticking to sort of static, simple visualizations is, I think, the best way of engaging with fast moving images where people are just scrolling through a bunch of stuff.
Thanks. There was also one question in the chat which I found quite interesting about how much time do you actually spend in cleaning data versus making the chart good looking? So maybe you can say a little bit about this.
Yeah, there's a joke in data journalism that you spend 90% of your time cleaning data and 10% complaining about cleaning the data. The nice thing is we have this sort of separation of roles where a data journalist might spend days or even a couple of weeks on cleaning a data set, getting it into a format that they can start to analyze it. Then their job is kind of mostly done at that point. Once they've analyzed it and sort of they know there's a story there, they'll hand it to a visualizer who does a totally different thing. They're actually making visualization, how did you phrase it, to look more to make the chart look good looking. Yeah, they're experts at that. It's very rare that you'll have someone who's incredibly good at writing the code to scrape data, patient enough to clean all the data, and good enough at analyzing the data and statistics and stuff, and has all the aesthetic kind of sensibilities that go into designing a chart. It's a real sort of it's art more than sort of science. The sort of the ability to create something that just looks correct, right, good looking, and interesting to look at. So it's kind of two different people spend a long time doing their different bits is I think the simplest way, but never underestimate how long it can take to clean data. And it does occasionally happen that you clean it and then it's just not very interesting. My colleague and data editor in the data team, when we had a graphic detail print page, he would make data journalists always come up with what he called a two-sided rubric. The idea being that if you get the data and find that it doesn't prove what you hoped, the opposite of that should be an interesting story too. So the story about is Google News biased? It's not. It would have been interesting if it was, but it's also interesting, but it's not biased one way or another. It's biased towards good reporting. That still generated a lot of interest. So having a sort of whatever happens, you'll get a story is an important approach, just because it takes so long to clean data.
Thank you. Alex, if you agree, let me take one more question, live question, and then we wrap up. So I would like to hand over to Cedric Vidon from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Please, Cedric.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Alex, for the great presentation. It was super insightful. You mentioned a lot the simplicity of your chart and the use of your brand, just one color, mainly the red, and to keep it simple. How did you convince your colleague or people working with you at The Economist to stay simple, to keep it on brand, not going all the way colorful and everything? Because we often hear within our organization that they are fed up of the blue, it's always blue and only blue. How did you manage that and manage expectation of colleagues that want super colorful charts that goes in every direction? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is we have a style guide which everyone has access to in the sort of visualization team. The second thing is it's just easier and quicker if you use default colors in most cases, and you save the kind of decision making and artistic sort of variation for the occasions where you really do need to choose something other than red, for example. Thirdly, I review all of our charts every Wednesday night, and then again every Thursday morning before they go to our printers, and someone else in the team reviews them from a sort of visual standpoint, and he will quite often say, "You've used a slightly different red there, change it." And he's quite stern, but he's right. There should be a kind of, you shouldn't turn a page and think, why is that red slightly different to the previous red? I guess there's a temptation, but I think, again, people have been here so long and they understand that it's helpful to readers not to have to decode, color choices on every single chart. That they don't really try it much anymore. And when we do, we have a Slack channel where like 8 visualizers all sort of have access to. Someone will put something in saying, what do we think of this? Does this work? Am I okay to do this? And sometimes we say, yeah, let's try this because it's actually a bit easier to understand. And then other times we say, no, stick with the normal palette. So yeah, a bit of just sort of constantly saying, no, we use this color for a reason. We've got this style guide. And there's also accessibility issues as well. If we suddenly put, light pink text on a red sort of background, some people can't read that. So there's good sort of accessibility reasons for sticking to a color palette as well as aesthetic reasons.
Thanks for also for this answer, and thank you to everyone for all your questions. May I please ask maybe the audience to switch on the video for a second, and maybe also the microphones, and please join me in giving Alex a big round of applause. That would be really great. So please turn on your cameras. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. It was amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks everyone for joining again this Global Network webinar, and thanks a lot to Alex once more from The Economist for this amazing presentation. We really enjoyed it a lot. And yeah, join us next time for our Global Network webinars. You should have received our newsletter yesterday. So please have a look what's coming up. We will have a few talks about the use of AI. Thanks everyone and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.